Welcome to Sciencera. In this video, I'm going to be discussing some of the long questions from the module FIS2602, that is respiration and excretion. Best of luck for everyone who's writing tomorrow. Let's begin. Question number 1 is briefly discuss diabetes insipidus. Diabetes insipidus, it is a disorder of salt and water metabolism. It is marked with intense thirst and heavy urination. It occurs when body cannot regulate fluids. This condition is caused by the hormonal abnormality. Diabetes insipidus is caused by problems with a hormone called vasopressin, an antidiuretic hormone. Antidiuretic hormone is produced by specialized nerve cells in hypothalamus. They passes from the hypothalamus to pituitary gland where it is stored until needed. These hormones help to retain water in the body and produce concentrated urine. Lack of production of this hormone will lead to increased excretion of water and produce less concentrated urine, also called polyuria. This increased loss of water causes dehydration, which will lead to the intense thirst called polydipsia. In rare cases, kidney does not respond to AVP. This causes a specific form of diabetes insipidus called nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. Some of the types of diabetes are nephrogenic, central, and gestational and dyspogenic. This will give you 5 marks for discussing diabetes insipidus. Next question is describe what happened during the spinal reflex component of micturition. Spinal reflex component of micturition. Micturition or urination is the process of emptying urine from the storage organ called urinary bladder. The act of micturition is an autonomic reflex at the level of spinal cord. The spinal reflex component will help to complete micturition when the act is voluntarily initiated. In this process, when the bladder is filled with afferent signal from the stretch and volume receptors are carried to the brain about the extent of filling, initiating several spinal reflexes. These serve to inhibit micturition until filling is complete while activating the voluntary external urethral sphincter via pudendal nerve. At the same time, distorsal activity is inhibited and the internal urethral sphincter is stimulated via sympathetic activity. Impulses from the filling bladder are carried to the spinal cord via the pelvic hypogastric nerves, whereas the duodenal hypogastric nerves carry impulses from the neck of the bladder and urethra. The pontine micturition center in the brain stem is activated via afferent signal from urinary bladder as it is filling. This center sends inhibiting impulses to spinal reflexes act to enable bladder void. Next question is discuss control of respiration under the following heading. Role of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is used to remove from the lungs by process of expiration, but before removal it is transported to blood streams where carbon dioxide converts into carbonic acid. It also helps in pH regulation of blood, regulation of respiratory drive, act as dilator for the smooth muscles. Its high level in the blood stimulates the respiration. Then they ask you for the role of oxygen. Respiration is controlled by the presence of oxygen. Peripheral chemoreceptors respond to the change in the partial pressure of oxygen. These chemoreceptors are in the aortic bodies and the carotid bodies and form part of the peripheral nervous system. When the partial pressure of oxygen falls, receptors get stimulated. Chemoreceptors have a negative feedback system in regulating the level of respiratory gases. When there is a massive decrease in the oxygen partial pressure, chemoreceptor will activate the center of inspiration of air. This increases the rate of depth of breathing, which balances the level of different respiratory gases, also known as hyperventilation. Then they ask you for the voluntary control of respiration. Respiration process can be voluntarily controlled. This is a very advantageous process as it helps to prevent foreign substances like water from entering the airway. This mechanism is possible because of the connection of the cerebral cortex with respiratory center. However, in the cases of abnormal buildup of respiratory gases, breathing process continues involuntarily to balance the gases in the body. This is because of the strong stimulation of inspiratory area where impulses are sent through the phrenic and intercostal nerves to the respiratory muscles to resume the involuntary breathing process. Hypothalamus and limbic system stimulate the respiratory center to alter the breathing rate according to the emotional state. Okay, then we have the inside question. Two women from a rural village in Limpopo went to the forest to fetch firewood. During the process, they lost each other. It is very hot and they spend the whole day trying to look for each other without having a food or water. It is known that should a person spend a whole day without having water, especially when it is hot, they become dehydrated. With the aid of diagram, fully discuss the mechanism that lead to dehydration and impact thereof the urine output. Okay, so hormones are the biomolecules that work by altering the cellular mechanism either by binding to a cell surface receptor or directly changing the expression of the certain gene. Hormones can be amino acid, proteins, and steroids. Then they ask you for the diagram which leads to the dehydration. So this is the diagram you can use for the dehydration. There is a loss of water in the body. Serum level of sodium and tonicity will increase. Osmoreceptors are thirst center and osmoreceptor of supraoptic nucleus will cause increase in thirst, and ADH from the posterior pituitary gland will also increase. Water reabsorption will increase, and serum and tonicity level will be normalized. So this is the diagram you can use for the dehydration and ECF volume depletion. Next, they ask you, Mr. A is diagnosed with metabolic acidosis while Mr. B is diagnosed with metabolic alkalosis. How would the physiological characteristics, causes, and compensation differ in each of these patients? Okay, before we move on, I just want to tell you that you can get my notes from Sciencera Tutors. These notes will be available after 3 o'clock today for you to download. Okay, let's continue with question 4. Metabolic acidosis is condition in which there is a high acid content in the body fluid. Causes will be diabetic ketoacidosis, hyperchloremic acidosis, kidney diseases, lactic acidosis, poisoning by aspirin or methanol, severe dehydration, drinking too much alcohol. Physiological characteristics of metabolic acidosis will include most symptoms of metabolic acidosis are due to the underlying disease. Metabolic acidosis itself most often causes rapid breathing. It can cause confusion or more tired. Severe metabolic acidosis can lead to shock or death. In some situations, it can be mild or presented with a chronic condition. Compensation will include increased ventilation, main body compensatory mechanism, renal excretion of hydrogen ion if possible, potassium exchange with excess hydrogen ion in ECF, extracellular fluids, hydrogen ion into cell and potassium ions out of the cell. Then we have metabolic alkalosis. Metabolic alkalosis happen when the stomach acid is decreased or certain electrolyte level drops. Causes will be antacids, baking soda, diuretics or water pills, certain laxatives or steroids, cystic fibrosis, conditions like dehydration, electrolyte imbalance in the body, which affects the level of sodium, chloride, potassium, and electrolytes, high level of adrenal hormone aldosterone, low level of chloride in the blood, recurrent vomiting, which occurs with cyclic vomiting syndromes. Physiological characteristics of alkalosis will include irritability, muscle twitching, muscle cramp, muscle spasm, fatigue, confusion, tremor, tingling and numbness, abnormal heart rhythm, seizure, and coma. Compensatory mechanism for metabolic acidosis will include body has regulatory mechanism for to increase the pH. Potassium ion move from the blood into cells, exchange of hydrogen ion, chemoreceptors stimulated in response to high pH, decreased respiratory rate and depth, decreases ventilation, and lead to carbon dioxide retention. Bicarbonate ions are excreted by kidneys. Hydrogen ion are reabsorbed as a normal renal function. So this is the compensatory mechanism for the metabolic alkalosis. Then they ask you to briefly discuss the renal response to alkalosis, how your kidney will respond in the process of alkalosis. So alkalosis refers to a insufficient extracellular fluid of hydrogen ion concentration and thus abnormally high pH. Overall response to alkalosis involve reduced urinary secretion of hydrogen and urinary excretion of filtered bicarbonate. Renal acid excretion is minimized in the context of alkalosis, thus preventing further increase in ECF pH. Increased renal bicarbonate excretion is increased, resulting in loss of bicarbonate from the extracellular fluid and an alkalinization of the urine. Together, these processes will reduce ECF bicarbonate concentration and in doing so can gradually reduce the blood pH to normal. Ultimate correction and alkalosis will require replacement of the deficient hydrogen ion by those generated through the normal metabolic process. Next, they ask you for the mechanism of carbon dioxide transport in the blood. Either you can draw this diagram in the exam or you can write it for 10 marks. Let's see the answer. Gaseous carbon dioxide derived from metabolically active cells diffuses in a dissolved state into the cytosol or erythrocytes present in our local capillaries. Erythrocyte possesses large number of carbonic anhydrase which catalyzes reaction of the diffused carbon dioxide with the molecule of H2O to form carbonic acid. Generation of carbonic acid from carbon dioxide and water is normally very slow kinetic processes and require catalysis by erythrocytes carbonic anhydrase to achieve rate viable for carbon dioxide transport. Once generated, carbonic acid spontaneously will dissociate into a free hydrogen ion and bicarbonate. The resultant free hydrogen ion appear to be absorbed by the erythrocytic hemoglobin molecule, which may promote enhanced oxygen uploading in the periphery due to Bohr effect. The resultant bicarbonate ion is transported across the erythrocyte membrane into the plasma in exchange of chloride ion using an electroneutral bicarbonate chloride antiporter. Bicarbonate then travels into the venous plasma to lung where the above reaction occurs in reverse, leading to the generation of gaseous carbon dioxide which is exhaled. Reversal of these reaction in lungs is enhanced by the presence of high oxygen partial pressures as discussed in the Haldane effect. Okay, question number 3. Then they give you the diagram for urinary system and they ask you to identify part marked as X and Y and further tabulate the main difference between the X and Y. So this is the afferent arterioles and part Y is the efferent arteriole. Afferent arterioles carry blood with nitrogenous waste into the glomerulus and afferent arteriole maintain the blood pressure, while efferent arterioles take the filtered blood out of the glomerulus. Efferent arterioles maintain the glomerular filtration rate. For the same question, part B, they ask you to identify and briefly describe the processes that occur in 1 to 4. So let's look at the 1 to 4. This is 1, 2, 3 and 4. Number 1 is filtration. Movement from blood to lumen. Filtration is the mass movement of water and solutes from the plasma to renal tubules that occur in the renal capsules. About 20% of the plasma volume passing through the glomerulus at any given time is filtered. This means that about 180 liters of fluid are filtered by the kidneys every day. Thus, the entire plasma volume is filtered 60 times a day. Filtration is primarily driven by the hydraulic pressure or blood pressure in the capillaries of the glomerulus. Part 2 is the reabsorption part, from lumen to blood. Reabsorption is the movement of water and solute from the tubules back into the plasma. Reabsorption of the water and specific solutes occur to varying degrees over the entire length of renal tubule. Bulk reabsorption, which is not under the hormonal controls, occur largely in the proximal tubules. Many important solutes are actively transported out of the proximal tubules such that their concentration are normally extremely low in the remaining fluid. Further, bulk reabsorption of sodium occurs in loop of Henle. Secretion is number 3, from blood to lumen again. Even after the filtration has occurred, the tubules continue to secrete the additional substances into the tubular fluid. This enhances the kidney's ability to eliminate certain waste and toxin. It is also essential to for the regulation of plasma potassium concentration and the pH. Last point is number 4. This is the excretion part, from lumen to the outside of the body. Excretion is what goes into the urine. The result of the above 3 process is excretion. Although the original concentration of a substance in the tubule fluid may initially be close to that of plasma, subsequent reabsorption and or the secretion can dramatically alter the final concentration in the urine. Then they ask you what would happen if the process that occurs in 4 is impaired, if it doesn't work. Number 4 we said was excretion. If the excretory function of kidney is impaired, patient will begin uremia. With this diagnosis, the patient lives no more than 3 days. Excretory function of the kidney is to neutralize all toxins in the blood, weed out them and remove them with urine. In this case, it is the share of the excretory capacity of urinary organ that lead to the following task. Number 1 is normalization of blood pressure. Number 2, regulation of water-salt balance. Number 3, correction of the acid state of urine. Number 4, providing high metabolic rate. And number 5 is regulation of concentration of salt and proteins in the body. Therefore, if a person has a violation of the excretory function of the kidney due to one of the disease, for example, pyelonephritis, glomerulonephritis, or swelling, all system falls into the decay. It is worth knowing that the process of purification of blood and formation of primary urine begins in nephron, the functional unit of the kidney. This was all for today's video. If you want notes on all of the question papers from 2011 to 22, please visit Stuvia and you can download my notes. Thank you for watching. If you like my video, don't forget to subscribe for more.